Chapter 8. Wonderful News. Just after Emma arrived home, she was surprised to see Harriet walk through the door.
Well, Emma, have you heard about Frank and Jane?
Asked Harriet excitedly.
You know?
Said Emma, looking surprised.
Yes, Mr. Weston has just told me. I didn't know that they were engaged. Isn't it exciting?
Replied Harriet, smiling. Emma was confused. Why was Harriet so cheerful?
Harriet, I don't understand. I thought that you would be upset to hear this news. I thought, well, that you and Frank...
What do you mean, Emma?
Asked Harriet.
You don't think that I'm interested in Frank, do you? You know who I like. I know that he is much older and richer than me, but you told me that perhaps he was the man for me.
Harriet,
Cried Emma.
you don't mean Mr. Knightley, do you?
Why, yes, of course I do.
Replied Harriet.
But when we talked of it, I thought that you meant Frank, because he rescued you from the gypsies.
Said Emma.
Of course I didn't mean Frank, Emma. I was talking about Mr. Knightley. Don't you remember how he rescued me at the ball?
Said Harriet, looking surprised.
And since then, he has been so kind and attentive to me. I am sure that he feels the same about me as I feel about him.
Emma remembered seeing them together at Donwell Abbey, and again at Hartfield, after her visit to Miss Bates. Why did she not notice that Harriet was in love with him before?
And perhaps Mr. Knightley really loves Harriet.
She thought unhappily. It was all too much for Emma. The idea of Harriet and Mr. Knightley being in love and perhaps marrying. Mr. Knightley was her special friend. She could not think of him with Harriet. Then Emma suddenly realized something.
I never knew it until now, but I believe I am in love with Mr. Knightley.
She thought in surprise.
Oh, this is terrible. What shall I do? I now realize how vain and selfish I have been.
She thought.
All this time I have tried to find Harriet a husband, and I never thought about what she wanted. First, I stopped her from marrying Mr. Martin. Then I wanted her to marry Mr. Elton. And finally, I decided that she loved Frank. I always thought I knew best.
Emma began to feel very ashamed of herself.
I told Harriet that she was too good for Mr. Martin and to look for someone better. If she loves Mr. Knightley now, then I can only blame myself.
She thought unhappily.
And it is clear that Mr. Knightley doesn't love me. He is always cross with me for something.
And she remembered his angry words to her about Mr. Martin and Miss Bates. Emma went to bed, tired and unhappy, but she could not sleep. The next day, when she woke up, she felt lonely and depressed. So she went for a walk in the garden. She was busy thinking about everything when, to her surprise, Mr. Knightley arrived. Emma tried to be calm. They walked together for a little while, but Mr. Knightley was quiet, and Emma was unhappy.
Mr. Knightley?
She said, trying to smile and to sound cheerful.
We have had some news since you have been in London. We will soon have a wedding in Highbury.
Mr. Knightley looked kindly at her unhappy face.
I know, Emma. I have heard.
He said softly.
I can see that you are very unhappy. But believe me, Emma, in time you will forget Frank.
And he took her hand.
Oh, Mr. Knightley,
Said Emma, looking surprised.
you think that I am in love with Frank too, don't you? Please believe me. We were both vain and silly, but Frank and I have never been in love. We are just friends.
She explained.
Is this really true?
Asked Mr. Knightley.
I thought...
I know.
Said Emma unhappily.
Everyone thought.
Then I have something that I need to say to you.
Said Mr. Knightley, looking at her with hope in his eyes.
Emma, we are friends. And I believe that you understand me better than anyone in the world.
He stopped and took her hand again.
My dearest Emma, I love you, and I have always loved you. Will you marry me?
Emma could not believe what she was hearing. Mr. Knightley loved her, not Harriet. He forgave her for being vain and silly. Emma was so happy that she could not speak, but finally she found her voice.
Yes, of course I will marry you, Mr. Knightley. I love you more than anyone.
Oh, Emma, all this time I thought that you were in love with Frank. I have been so jealous of him.
He explained.
After the picnic, I was so convinced of your love for him that I decided to leave Highbury.
Emma blushed, but Mr. Knightley smiled kindly, and she could not feel embarrassed for long. She was too happy. Later, they went inside and had tea with Emma's father, but they decided not to tell him the news that they were engaged yet.
Oh, but how can I tell Harriet?
Thought Emma when she was alone.
I can't see her and not tell her the truth.
So, the next day, Emma wrote a letter to her sister Isabella and asked her to invite Harriet to London for a few days. She knew that Harriet would love a holiday, and she thought that it would give her time to think. She loved her friend and did not want to hurt her. The same day, Mrs. Weston brought Emma a letter from Frank. He was very, very sorry for not telling Emma the truth about himself and Jane. Emma still felt cross with him, but she could not stay cross for long.
I want us to be friends again,
She thought.
but I also want to be friends with Jane.
She decided to visit Jane, but on the day that she went, Mrs. Elton was at the house too, and Emma felt that she couldn't speak freely in front of her. When it was time for Emma to go, Jane took her to the door herself.
Emma, let me explain.
Said Jane, talking confidentially.
Please forgive me for being cold and unfriendly to you all this time. But I couldn't be your friend and not tell you the truth about Frank and me. It had to be a secret, so I wasn't friendly to Frank in public either. He didn't like that, so he spent all his time with you, to make me jealous. After that, I was so unhappy about my new job as a governess with Mrs. Smallridge, far away from Highbury and from Frank. I'm sorry, Emma. I really don't like secrets.
But Jane, I am sorry. Please, let's just forget everything and be friends,
said Emma, and they both smiled. Yes, it was time to be friends, but Emma knew that she could not be happy until Harriet knew about Mr. Knightley. One day, shortly after that, while Harriet was still in London, Mr. Knightley told Emma something very surprising.
Emma, I am afraid I have something to tell you which you won't approve of. I have had a letter from Robert Martin.
Emma looked confused and wondered what he meant.
He has been in London for a few days now, and while he was there, he met Harriet again. Well, Emma,
he said, looking worried.
He and Harriet are now engaged.
Oh, Mr. Knightley, this is wonderful news,
cried Emma. Now Mr. Knightley looked confused.
I made a terrible mistake trying to matchmake for Harriet,
explained Emma.
I now know that it was wrong of me. Mr. Martin is a good man, and I believe Harriet has always loved him. I just hope that they can forgive me for always thinking I know best,
she said truthfully. Mr. Knightley looked at her and smiled. How he loved his beautiful Emma. When Frank came to Highbury, he and Jane visited Emma. They were all embarrassed at first, but Frank was soon laughing and talking about their wedding in London. Harriet also blushed when she saw Emma again, and they remembered their conversation about Mr. Knightley.
I was very silly, Emma,
said Harriet.
I know now that I have only ever loved Mr. Martin.
So there were 2 weddings in Highbury that year. First Harriet's and Mr. Martin's, and then, a month later, Emma's and Mr. Knightley's. And after that, Emma decided never to matchmake again.